Welcome to the deep dive. We've got some seriously creepy stories to get into today. Stories about those moments when reality kind of goes sideways. You know what I mean? Like when you're not sure if what you're seeing or hearing is actually real or if your mind is playing tricks on you.
It's fascinating, right? Those moments where the line between the explainable and the unexplainable just completely blurs. It really taps into something primal, something deep within the human psyche.
Exactly. It's like that feeling you get when you're home alone at night and you hear a noise and you're suddenly hyper aware of every creak and groan in the house.
It's like our senses are suddenly heightened, but our minds are also racing, trying to make sense of the unknown.
Right. And sometimes the explanations we come up with are even scarier than the actual noise. Okay, so speaking of scary noises, let's dive into our first story. This one comes from someone who, at 16, had a terrifying experience in their own home. Imagine this. You wake up in the middle of the night, and there's this dark, hooded figure with glowing eyes just standing in your hallway.
Ugh. Just the thought of that sends chills down my spine. It's that classic horror movie image, the intruder in the night, the violation of your safe space. But in this case, it's even more disturbing because of the details the person provides.
Right. It's not just a fleeting glimpse of a shadow. This person describes the figure in detail. The glowing eyes, a scaly finger reaching out, even the voice. The voice mimicking the person's own mother.
It's like this entity is deliberately playing on their deepest fears, using something familiar and comforting like a parent's voice to create even more terror. It's truly chilling.
It's like a nightmare come to life. But here's the thing that really gets me. While hiding in the bathroom, the person tries to move a heavy cabinet to block the door. But they can't. It's like something is holding it in place. And get this, they even try again the next day when they're calm and collected and they still struggle to move it.
That's the detail that makes this story go beyond just a bad dream. It suggests that there might have been an actual physical interaction between this entity and the cabinet.
Right. It makes you wonder if this was more than just a figment of their imagination. Could extreme fear actually affect our perception of physical strength? Or is there something else at play? Something that could actually manipulate the physical world around us?
It's a question that has puzzled philosophers and scientists for centuries. Can thoughts, emotions, or even supernatural forces influence the material world? It's a question that's hard to answer definitively.
Okay, so moving on to our second story. This one takes place in a setting that many of us can relate to. A local pub called Le Petit. It's a place where people go to unwind, have a drink, maybe catch up with friends. But on this particular night, the arrival of this well-dressed, imposing stranger throws everything off. It's like the air gets heavy, the temperature drops, and suddenly everyone's on edge.
This story taps into that primal fear of the unknown, that feeling that something is wrong even if you can't quite put your finger on it. The pub, a place typically associated with warmth and camaraderie, becomes charged with an almost palpable sense of dread.
Right. And the narrator describes this feeling of unease spreading through the pub like a virus. The regulars start acting strangely. One guy, Shimura, is practically glued to his briefcase. Sweating, looking terrified, it's like he senses something bad is about to happen.
You also have this young couple in a corner booth, seemingly oblivious to the growing tension. It's that contrast between the normalcy of their date and this encroaching feeling of unease that really heightens the suspense.
Oh, absolutely. It's like you said, that feeling that something is about to go down and you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then around midnight, things get even weirder. The music cuts out, the pub becomes freezing cold, and the narrator hears whispers. Whispers that sound almost inhuman.
The whispers are such an effective detail because they're so ambiguous. We don't know what they're saying or where they're coming from. It allows our imaginations to run wild, filling in the blanks with our own fears.
Totally. And by this point, Shimura is having a full-blown meltdown, and this posh stranger is just watching everything unfold with this chillingly calm demeanor.
The stranger's behavior is so unnerving. Are they the cause of this disruption, some kind of malevolent force reveling in the chaos? Or are they simply an observer, someone who can see what's happening but chooses not to intervene?
Right. It's like they're this enigma, a puzzle that the narrator can't quite solve. And here's where things get really intense. The next morning, the narrator discovers that the young couple from the pub was found dead near the pub.
That detail takes the story to a whole other level. Suddenly, this isn't just a spooky night at the pub. It suggests that there might be real-world consequences to these intrusions of the uncanny.
Exactly, and it leaves the narrator grappling with this burden of knowledge. Do they tell the police what they experienced? Do they even have any proof? It's this lingering sense of uncertainty and danger that really makes the story stick with you.
And to add to that, the narrator mentions that both the stranger and Shimura are visible on the pub's CCTV footage. What did that footage show? Did it offer any clues, or did it only deepen the mystery?
It's like we need to see that footage, right? Okay, so you've got these two encounters with the unknown, both leaving us with a feeling of unease and this question of whether evil can truly lurk in the everyday. But our third story takes a slightly different approach. It's not about a single terrifying event, but rather about a family's ongoing experiences with spirits, all stemming from a ritual the grandmother performed before immigrating to the U.S. from Vietnam.
This story introduces the concept of ancestral protection, which is a belief found in many cultures around the world. It's the idea that the spirits of loved ones can watch over and protect their descendants, even after death.
So instead of malevolent entities, we have these potentially benevolent spirits, like guardian angels.
Exactly. It's a shift from fear to a sense of comfort, the idea that even in death, our loved ones are still connected to us, looking out for us.
I like that. It's a less spooky, more heartwarming way to look at the idea of spirits, right? And the narrator provides several examples to support this belief. They talk about seeing the ghost of a deceased husband at the retirement home where they worked. And both of their sisters claim to have seen a shadow figure watching over their newborn babies.
These experiences, while potentially unsettling to an outsider, are presented as acts of love and protection. The spirits aren't there to frighten or harm, but to offer comfort and guidance.
Right, and it gets even more specific. The narrator's mother claims to have seen the ghost of her deceased brother-in-law's father riding his scooter past her bed on the anniversary of his death.
It suggests that these spirits might still be tied to the people and things they loved in life, even after death.
That's really interesting. So it's not just about protection, it's about maintaining those bonds of love and family, even across the veil of death.
Exactly. And this idea ties into the narrator's own personal experiences. They've always felt a strong sense of intuition, of having a guardian angel looking out for them, even before learning about the ritual. They attribute their good luck and their ability to avoid bad situations to this unseen presence.
So it's like they had this feeling of being protected, and learning about the ritual just gave it a name and a context.
Precisely. It makes you wonder if we all have these guardian spirits, whether we're aware of them or not. Are there unseen forces guiding us, protecting us from harm, helping us make the right choices?
Now, that's a question I think a lot of people have pondered at some point in their lives. And this family story goes even further. The narrator talks about having vivid dreams, frequent déjà vu, and a feeling of being subtly steered away from potentially bad outcomes. Like something is looking out for them, even when they're not aware of it.
This adds another layer to the concept of ancestral protection. It suggests that these spirits aren't just passive observers. They might be actively influencing our lives in subtle ways, guiding us towards positive outcomes, even if we're not consciously aware of it.
Okay, now my mind is officially blown. 3 stories, 3 very different encounters with the unknown, but they all raise these profound questions about the nature of reality, the power of belief, and the possibility that there's more to the world than we can see or explain.
Absolutely. These stories challenge us to look beyond the surface, to question our assumptions about what's real and what's possible. And ultimately, they remind us that there's still so much we don't know about the universe and our place within it.
And that's just part 1 of our deep dive. We're going to take a break here, but when we come back, we're going to delve even deeper into these stories, exploring possible explanations, looking at things from both a scientific and a spiritual perspective. So stay tuned, because things are about to get really interesting.
Welcome back to our deep dive. You know, it's like we're looking through a kaleidoscope when we consider these stories. So many different patterns and interpretations emerge depending on how we turn them.
Yeah, for sure. We've got these creepy encounters, but the big question is, what do they mean? Are we dealing with actual ghosts, hallucinations, or maybe something we haven't even thought of? I'm ready to put my thinking cap on and really dig into this.
Okay, let's revisit that hooded figure for a moment. Those details, the glowing eyes, the scaly finger, the voice mimicking the mother, they all point towards something malevolent, something classic.
Right, it's like it crawled out of a nightmare. But then there's that weird detail about the heavy cabinet. The person couldn't move it during the encounter or even the next day. It doesn't really feel like just a bad dream when you consider that, right?
Exactly. That's what makes this story so compelling. It forces us to ask, Can these entities, these things, actually interact with our physical world? Could they be messing with stuff, even our sense of what's real?
Okay, hold on. Now we're getting into some seriously spooky territory. And it makes you think about that second story, the strange night at the pub. Could that well-dressed stranger have been more than just some random guy? Could he have been something else, causing all those unsettling events?
It's definitely a possibility worth considering. Think about it. The sudden temperature drop, the whispers, that heavy feeling of dread, they could all be signs of something supernatural messing with the natural order of things.
And then, of course, there's the tragic death of that young couple. Was it just a coincidence, or was it somehow connected to all the strangeness going on at the pub? I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it.
This is where we get to the idea of evil, you know?
Yeah.
Could it be that negative energy or maybe even evil spirits are attracted to certain places or events, like they can sense vulnerability? Could the pub, with all those emotions swirling around, have become a magnet for something dark and sinister?
Okay, now that is a truly terrifying thought. It makes you wonder if we're ever really safe, even in places that feel familiar and normal. But then we have that third story, the one about the family with a legacy of spirits. It has a different vibe, doesn't it? It's not about scary entities, it's about protective spirits watching over their family. It's almost kind of nice, right?
This story speaks to that deep human need for connection and guidance, even after death. It's a really powerful concept, the idea that our loved ones can still be with us, watching over us, even if we can't see them.
It is. And those details the narrator shared, seeing a ghost at the retirement home, the shadow figures over the babies, it adds this layer of love and protection. It's not just about the spirit world, it's about family and those bonds that maybe, just maybe, can last beyond death.
Right, and it's important to remember that these experiences, while they might seem strange to an outsider, are presented as good, even comforting, within the family. Those spirits aren't trying to scare anyone, they're there to help. It's a different way of looking at the supernatural, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's like having guardian angels looking out for you, even if you can't see them. And speaking of guardian angels, the narrator mentioned having this strong intuition, a lot of good luck. They even felt protected before they even knew about the ritual their grandmother performed.
Now that's where it gets really interesting. What if those experiences were the result of those protective spirits subtly influencing their life, like nudging them toward good choices or away from harm?
So it's not just about outright protection, but about little nudges in the right direction, those lucky breaks that we usually just brush off as coincidence.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder,
Mhm.
do we all have those guardian spirits, those unseen helpers looking out for us? Are there forces at work that we're not even aware of, shaping our lives in ways we don't fully understand?
Whoa, now you're really making me think. It's like there's a whole other layer of reality happening just below the surface. But if these spirits can affect our lives, does that mean we even have free will? Are we all just living out a pre-written script?
Now that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's a question that has puzzled philosophers and theologians for ages. Do we really have control over our choices, or are we all just part of a bigger plan?
You're blowing my mind here. It's a lot to wrap your head around. And if we consider the possibility that these spirits are real, that they can interact with us, it opens up a whole other can of worms. Like, how do they do it? How does it work?
Exactly. And why do some people seem more sensitive to these things than others? Is it something we're born with, or does it have to do with what we believe?
Oh man, I feel like we need a whole other deep dive just to scratch the surface of these questions.
For sure. The deep, deep rabbit hole we're going down here. But, even if we don't have all the answers, just exploring these stories, thinking about these questions, it expands our sense of what's possible. It makes us question everything we thought we knew about the world.
I'm totally with you on that. Okay, this deep dive is definitely one for the books. But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let's take a step back and try to look at these stories from a more scientific perspective. When we come back, we'll explore what science and psychology have to say about these phenomena. And we're back. It's time to shift gears a bit. We've been deep in the realm of the paranormal, but now I think it's time to bring in a little bit of that good old-fashioned skepticism.
I agree. It's always important to consider all sides of the story, right? We've talked about the emotional and spiritual side of these encounters, but let's see what science has to say about it. Maybe there are some perfectly rational explanations for what these folks experienced.
Exactly. After all, our brains are pretty amazing, but they can also be tricked sometimes.
Right.
Like, I swear I've seen my phone move across the table by itself, but it was just a weird shadow or something.
Oh, absolutely. Our brains are constantly trying to make sense of the world around us, but sometimes they get things wrong. They fill in the blanks, make assumptions based on incomplete information. It's how we evolved, but it also means we're susceptible to things like hallucinations.
Hallucinations. So you're saying these people might not have actually seen or heard what they thought they did?
It's a possibility worth considering. Think about it, especially in that first story with the hooded figure. The person had just woken up in the middle of the night. They were probably still in that hazy, half-asleep state.
Right. Like when you wake up from a dream and you're not quite sure if it was real or not.
Exactly. In those moments, the line between dreams and reality can get really blurry. Our brains are still processing information from our dreams, and sometimes that spills over into our waking perception.
Okay, so that could explain the hooded figure. But what about that heavy cabinet? The person couldn't move it, even the next day when they were fully awake. That seems pretty physical, pretty real.
Well, even our perception of physical strength and effort can be influenced by psychological factors. In moments of intense fear, our adrenaline is pumping, our senses are heightened, we might perceive things as being much heavier or more difficult than they actually are.
So it's like their fear made the cabinet feel heavier, even though it wasn't actually any different.
Precisely. Our perception of reality is filtered through our senses and our brains, and those filters can be distorted in extreme situations.
That makes sense. But what about the pub story? There were multiple people who experienced those weird events. The temperature drop, the whispers, the general feeling of dread. Surely that can't all be chalked up to individual hallucinations.
Well, that's where the concept of group hallucinations comes in.
Hmm.
It's a fascinating phenomenon. If a group of people are in a heightened emotional state, especially if they're expecting something unusual to happen, their collective anxiety can actually create a shared perception that isn't based in reality.
So it's like they're all feeding off of each other's energy, amplifying each other's fears.
Exactly. And in the pub story, the arrival of that strange, well-dressed stranger might have been the trigger. His unusual appearance and behavior could have created a ripple effect of unease that spread throughout the pub, priming everyone for a weird experience.
It's like their collective imagination took over, and they all started seeing and hearing things that weren't actually there.
It's a possibility. And remember, the whispers were never clearly understood. That ambiguity makes them even more susceptible to interpretation, especially when everyone's already on edge.
Okay, I can see how that could work. But what about that third story, the one about the family legacy of spirits? How does science explain something like ancestral protection?
Well, when we're dealing with concepts like spirits and the afterlife, we're moving beyond the realm of what traditional science can easily measure or explain. But we can still look at it through the lens of psychology and culture.
Right, because those beliefs are definitely a part of the family's reality, even if we can't scientifically prove or disprove them.
Exactly. And beliefs can have a powerful impact on our experiences. If you believe your ancestors are watching over you, you're more likely to interpret events in a way that confirms that belief.
So, like, they might see a shadow figure as a protective spirit, even if someone else would just see it as a trick of the light.
Precisely. It's all about perspective and interpretation, and the family's shared cultural background would further reinforce those beliefs.
Makes sense, but what about those more personal experiences the narrator described, like the strong intuition and the feeling of always being lucky? Could those be explained by science, too?
Oh, absolutely. Our brains are incredibly complex. We're constantly processing information, making connections, even below the level of conscious awareness. The narrator might be picking up on subtle cues, making decisions based on subconscious insights that they attribute to their ancestors' guidance.
So it's like their belief in ancestral protection is actually influencing their behavior and shaping their experiences.
It's definitely a possibility. Our beliefs have a powerful impact on our actions and perceptions.
Wow, this is really making me think about how much of what we perceive as reality is actually filtered through our own beliefs and expectations.
That's the beauty of exploring these topics.
Mm.
It challenges us to question everything, to consider multiple perspectives.
So are we saying that the paranormal doesn't exist, that it's all just in our heads?
Not necessarily. Science can offer explanations, but it doesn't have all the answers. The human mind is still a mystery in many ways. And there's always the possibility that there are forces at work that we haven't discovered or fully understood yet.
That's a good point. It's important to stay open to the possibility of the unknown, even as we seek rational explanations.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe someday science will catch up with these mysteries and provide us with even more insights.
Well, until then, I think it's safe to say that our deep dive has left us with more questions than answers. But hey, that's what makes it so fascinating, right?
Absolutely. It's the mysteries, the unexplained, that keep us curious, keep us searching for knowledge and understanding.
So, to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep an open mind. You never know what you might discover lurking just beyond the edge of the ordinary. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.